everyone. I'm back to go ahead and discuss a little more about these crystal power cells. My first video was very rushed, and I apologize. My camera guy was shaky, so nothing against Montana Mikey, but he doesn't have the steady hands to actually help shoot this. So I would like to just go ahead and go over exactly what is done with these crystal power cells. Unfortunately, this video I will not be making any, but I did want to go ahead and discuss the principle of what you would get for the end result. This right here is the formula that I am following. This is pretty close to what John Hutchison had actually laid out in his video. As you can see here, that we're primarily working with Epsom salt, Rochelle salt, calcium carbonate, which is limestone, and then a couple other minerals to go ahead and actually give the crystal structure some actual substance to it. So galena, which is a type of mineral that has a lot of lead in it, so you do want to be careful working with it. You will be dusting particles of galena up, so take whatever precautions you feel necessary. If you need to wear gloves or wear a respirator to keep pieces from getting in your lungs, then that's up to you. I personally am not going to worry too much about it. I guess I live life one day at a time, so silver in trace amounts, it doesn't have to be much, and silver is pricey, so I do recommend getting a little chunk of it and using it. There are various forms you can buy it in, but I do recommend a solid block, something thin that you can actually get your hands on. In a second I'll show you what I'm working with here. Iron pyrite is also known as fool's gold. It is really inexpensive, easy to come by. You can get it almost at any sort of stone shop or off the internet, or at any sort of tourist trap where Native Americans might be. Anyways, go ahead and go over the actual setup here. Here are the actual materials involved. What we have here is the Epsom salt. You want to make sure it's free of any sort of fragrances, anything that would be a contaminant. Rochelle salt right here. It is used in photography, so it's easy to find that way, and it doesn't cost that much, so it's a very inexpensive way to get into it. Calcium carbonate, it's just limestone. I was able to find some powdered online that was already purified, so little easier to work with there when it's already in powder form. I have a big bag of it just because it's cheap. I will only need trace amounts of it to actually make the cells, so that bag will last me forever. Seeing in here, here's a couple of the materials. That is called galena. That is the lead-based material that I was telling you about. We also see here in the 2-ounce bag is iron pyrite, fool's gold. This chunk here contains a lot of silver, and it contains iron pyrite. I found this chunk off of the internet, and it's actually a lot softer to work with when it comes to the silver. So I'm going to go ahead and use this natural chunk here. I did go ahead and buy some little beads of silver off the internet. It was relatively inexpensive going this route here, but I really, in hindsight, wish this would have been a solid piece of silver instead of little beads. The little beads I found are extremely hard to actually hold down and file. This right here, copper tubing that I have been cutting with a conduit cutter. I went with the 3/8 inch piece there so that I would have enough room to stick a 1/4 inch bolt through the copper pieces. Just a standard, it's actually a metric, but it's 1/4 inch equivalent. I wanted to go ahead and use the texture of this to increase metal surface area to see if that would give better voltage. Okay, these are the actual finished cells here. Just going ahead and showing these off. Let me grab this right here is the blend of Rochelle salts, Epsom salts, calcium carbonate, silver, galena, and iron pyrite. As you can see, it's indistinguishable. You are using very trace amounts, just barely enough to even register in there. It is important to note here that if you let this sit for too long, it will start to chunk up and crystallize and be inconsistent when it comes to melting. The only way around that is to go ahead and mortar and pestle it out, which I don't have, or to break it up using something like a spoon, or even a blender would work, but I didn't want to risk these chemicals in my house blender. I mentioned earlier about using refractory cement. I did want to show what a couple of pieces end up looking like when they're coated with that. Here is one of the bolts coated with this refractory cement. I keep saying refractory cement. It's sodium silicate is the actual chemical compound. It comes in various forms. This was by far the cheapest and one of the most pure ways that I could get it. For the mix I do have is colored. It is a goopy mixture. Like I said, it is a cement, so it's got the consistency of a glue. It does dry really quickly, so you'll want to keep your supply of it covered, and you definitely want to work with whatever pieces you make relatively quickly if you're trying to work with it in a liquid state. What else is important here? A cheap conduit cutter you can find for $10 at a hardware store is enough to work with the conduit. Do go slowly with the conduit as it is prone to bending if you go with the flexible copper tubing, which it's easy to work with but also easily broken. Here is one of the cells that I worked with initially. This is the way that I've seen them done. The actual inventor, John Hutchison, recommends using a piece of cotton or a Q-tip to plug the end with. I've tried that way with a few of these other cells, which I'll show off here in a minute. But I found that working with silicone was the easiest way to do it. It makes for a very clean lead, and you know that silicone is not going to be conductive. So that definitely plugs up one end and keeps from making any sort of a ground out. These tubes, I'm just waiting for the silicone to dry. They have not had the refractory cement applied. I wanted to wait until the silicone had dried so I didn't knock out any of the plugs. The finished products, after they've been coated with refractory cement and then filled with the crystal compound, comes out looking something like this. I'll try to hold it better into my little light here. That is cotton there, coated with the refractory cement so that it wouldn't have a chance of conducting. The top is, you can see the crystal actually growing on the top here. Is just it's a bolt that's covered with refractory cement and then dipped in the stuff. And then the contents of the actual cell are then filled to create the cell. Let me find one of these that's actually got the silicone backing. So I don't know if you can see the color difference there, but that silicone there, it's actually done really well. I haven't noticed any sort of a voltage drop-off. I actually think that it might do better than the cotton method that the inventor went ahead and showed. It was definitely easier to work with. I did contemplate using hot glue as well, but I didn't want the chance of a hot chemical being poured on the hot glue to cause it to mix or even for the plugs to melt out. And these cells have all done really well. I went ahead and labeled them all with a Sharpie so that I could keep track of initial voltages for testing purposes. I did also try a couple of other cells that I was not exactly happy with. I've heard of a lot of people sticking them between pennies and making multiple layers here. Here's a couple that I did try, and I don't know if they're just shorting out or if I had too much compound on to make a good connection, but stacking them like this method here, it just simply does not work. Multiple layers here. This is about 6 pennies each, 1 6 and 1 7, and I don't get hardly anything off of a multimeter when I check it here. Very poor. I don't know if I want to say it's poor design. It needs further testing, but it didn't give me any sort of desired results, and it certainly didn't ramp up the voltage like I was hoping for. Different elements here. I suppose while I've got memory left on my SD card, I better go ahead and show the actual voltages of the cells here. Let me see if I can actually get good light for my multimeter. Standard multimeter here. I don't know how hard it's going to be to make out the actual settings on it. I have been testing the half volt DC mark. That's what it's set out right now. And then we're measuring along this top row the actual milliamps. I might have to take some stills later and import them into the video to actually show what we're getting off of some of these cells. Anyways, there is my introduction. I hope that you found it informative. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. I would like to go ahead and share this technology with everyone I can. Holding back a little bit because I would eventually like to be able to sell these things, but the time alone in making them is where the money's going to be worth in them, because they take about 4 or 5 minutes to set each one up. Cost of materials isn't much, but I guess the big question is, what's your time worth to you? I'm a firm believer that in America, if you're making a product with your hands, you should be able to make at least $20 an hour in doing so. So that's going to be my base rate when it comes down to these. I think that's going to be pretty fair. $20 an hour in labor plus probably about maybe $1 in parts to make each one, probably less. But more information on that as I develop everything and actually figure out how I'm going to develop free energy for everyone. I guess your support is going to be needed at that point. I'm certainly not asking for donations until I've got a product to hand you back. So I hope you found this informative, and any questions or comments are greatly appreciated. Thank you for tuning in.